I'm Leonard Riggs, and this is my podcast from my head to your ears. And I tell you, my dad has been gone 9 years since May 7th, 2016. And there's not a day when I don't think about him. I miss him terribly, but I'm at the point where my grief is more funny memories. I remember the things my dad said that always made me laugh. My dad was not a fool by any means, so don't get me wrong, but he had his own little way of speaking and his way of thinking. I think my dad was such a deep thinker. Sometimes he would blurt out things, and it would come out, it would come out wrong or get lost in translation. He often would speak exactly what was on his mind, whether it was right or wrong. But a lot of the things he did make me smile or make me laugh to this day. I really don't want to make my podcast about grief and all that stuff. This is a grief podcast, but, I thought I would share the funny things that my dad said or did today, just because he's been on my mind a lot. But I'm going to take a break and I'll be right back with more of, the things my dad, would say or do that made me laugh. I'll be right back. I'm Leonard Riggs. This is my podcast from my head to your ears. I'm Leonard Riggs, and this is my podcast from my head to your ears. And today I'm talking about my dad and the things he said. Wasn't there a column called Crap, more or less? Crap, stronger word, that my dad said. It was a TV series also with William Shatner. That's kind of what I'm thinking here, but my dad could do anything. He was a very smart man, very talented. He was an artist. He could play a horn. In fact, played a trumpet while he was in the Army. Often would wake us up with, what is it called? Reverie. Yeah, we woke up that way. In fact, I got my alarm clock set for that sound, and it wakes me right up. But my dad was such a character, and I know I am too. I own that. I am Leonard Riggs Jr. Very much. I'm sure people will remember some of the stuff I've said, and hopefully they'll laugh about it or roll their eyes or whatever they do. But I find the stuff my dad said kind of endearing. My dad's, oftentimes would say things he thought there was no filter. So, he would not correct himself. So things kind of came out wrong. I may have done this in a podcast before, but, if I have, forgive me. I guess my mind is, I'm getting senile. I don't know, but, I can still remember my dad yelling, raise that window down. And I was like, how do you raise a window down? Stuff like that. And some of his sayings always crack me up. Like when it was snowing out and he would say, and this is bad, I'll kind of make it a little more mild than what he would say, but he'd say it's slick as a cat's butt outside. And then I remember him saying that a lot. And then one day when I was older and I thought about what he was actually saying, I said, Dad, how do you know how slick a cat's butt is? And I still remember him kind of chuckling, and there was just things like that he would say. I miss my dad so bad. He Oh, gosh. When I was growing up, I looked up to my dad. I look at pictures of me when I was a child, and most often, I was either on my dad's shoulders, in my dad's arms, or he had me pulled close by. I was his son, and he loved my sisters too, but I was the baby of the family, and my dad kept me close by and protected me, and he was my protector and my best buddy. And if there was something I wanted, he would take me all over. Like, say I'd see a prize in a cereal box that was advertised, and we'd go like on a Saturday and go around trying to find that box. That's the way my dad was. I guess I was very spoiled as a child, but I mean no disrespect by laughing about my dad. I remember when I first started my job, he would pick me up from work, and I didn't ask him to. He would just show up. I worked midnights, and it's 6 a.m. there he'd be waiting, because he was retired at that point of the game. And he always made sure I had a ride to and from work. I'd tell him often, Dad, I'll walk home. Don't worry about it. But most of the time, there he was. Anyway, I still remember one day he's giving me a ride home, and he turned off from my store, and he hit a bump. And he just looked bewildered. And I said, well, Dad, what was that? He said, it was butt. And I said, what? It was butt. And I was like, I think he meant it was a bump, but it was butt. And I told that to my buddy Brandon, and Brandon will quote that. We still laugh about that. In my older years, Brandon would often take my dad around, and every time we'd hit the railroad tracks on my way to my house on when I lived on a street called Malky Street. I actually had a website called Leonard's View from Malky Street at that time in my town here. I don't live there anymore, obviously. I had to sell the property, but we'd go over the railroad tracks, because my town is separated by 2 railroad tracks. Or at that time it still is actually. But when he'd go by the railroad tracks towards our fine town, there was like metal scrap all around, and my dad would just have a fit, because he was a railroad man, and he would say, I'm going to call the law on those people. That's illegal. I'm going to call the sheriff. Well, it was like, okay, Dad. I mean, he would say that literally every time we'd go over those railroad tracks. And of course, like I said, this is in his later years. So, oh, he was so funny. And, God, he started saying things. He started getting kind of insulting in his older years. And oftentimes, he would say things like, what have you done for your country? Or, you gonna amount to anything? He would just come up and say that to you. You're like, what, Dad? It was like, he said that to my older sister, Lori, that passed away not too long ago, and he hurt her feelings so bad. And I was like, Lori, he just says that randomly. I said, I don't know where he got that or why he says it. It's kind of mean, but he'd say that to just about anybody. Gosh. Whenever he broke his hip and he was kind of drugged up, and this was literally in the final months of his life. He broke his hip in March of 2016, and he went to hospital. And when I went to see him, he was at the beginning stages of Alzheimer's. My dad was 90 years old at this point. And he was just beginning to have Alzheimer's. That added with the drugs he was on that was making him feel nothing. He looked at me and said, what plane did you fly in on when I came? And I said, I thought quick. I'm like, well, B-52. And he's like, yeah, that's a good plane. And then he kept saying to tell my mom to, if he doesn't make it out of this, to go back to the States and live it up. And he was so cute when he was under the drugs there. Oh, he was so funny. And then I ended up staying a lot with him in the hospital. And I was by his side as much as I could. Me and my sister Kim my sister Kim also spent time with him. But, he had a roommate who was kind of noisy, who was equally out of it. And my dad would sit there and make fun of him all night. And he'd say, listen to him. The guy would be yelling, ouch. My dad'd say, tell him to shut up. And I'm like, Dad. Oh my God. The nurses told me that he would yell, yoo-hoo, yoo-hoo, can you change my litter box? When he'd go to the bathroom. But even though my dad was older and obviously under the influence of Alzheimer's and whatever medication they had him on, even in his younger days, like the raise the window down thing, he just, oh my God, he would just say the darndest things and do the darndest things. I think of these things often, and I just laugh. He was so funny. And another thing about my dad, he loved football and he would watch it. And mind you, he would, Sunday afternoons, he would cook Sunday dinner. My dad was a really good cook, and on Sunday he'd make, he could make a steak so tender it would just melt in your mouth, or he'd do a roast beef and it was just fall off the fork, or make a pot roast or whatever he did. It was really good. He learned to cook in the Army, and Sunday dinners were his because Mom went to church. So when she got home, he had dinner ready. And then it was time, especially during football season, it was time for feetball, as he called it. And we would all sit down as a family, and he would say the prayer, and he'd fill his plate, and then off he went to the living room to watch his feetball. And Sundays were football day, and he didn't move from that TV. I mean, sometimes he was a mechanical draftsman, and he would do drafting work for where he worked, and a lot of times he'd work on it on the weekend, and he would work on it while he's watching his football. So other than that, he didn't stray from his football. But watching him watch football was a sight to behold. He got into that game, and my dad did not cuss around us. I think when he was with his friends or at work, he cussed a lot more. But my mom was very religious, but the only thing he would say is shit. So the whole time he's watching football, he's yelling, shit, shit. And he would get up and he'd get the TV, get towards the TV, and he'd be all tensed up and jumping up and down. And I would sit there and just watch him, and I would just roll, and he would be totally oblivious to me watching him. At Christmas, and this was just about every year when I was a kid till I got old enough to go do it myself. But at Christmas, I would always, right after Thanksgiving, I would beg my dad, can you go get the Christmas tree down? I don't know why we did it on Sunday, because of all the days, he was watching his football. I feel guilty now that I did this to him. I think I know why I did it on Sundays, because Saturday we would go shopping. Almost every Saturday we would be gone until 3 and 4 in the afternoon. We would go to West Frankfort and go to Grandpa John's, which is an old department store in West Frankfort, Illinois. Actually more in Johnson City, Illinois, but in between Frankfort and Johnson City. and go to Grandpa John's and Sears. And I think I've talked about that in other podcasts. But so, we weren't home, but on Sunday, he was home, and of course, watching football. But I would say, Dad, can we get the Christmas tree down, please? Because we had an artificial tree, and it was in the attic. And he would always say, wait till halftime. Then he'd go up and get it for me. Because I was and is a big Christmas kind of guy. Anyway, I never really shared the love of football with him, but I did enjoy watching him watch football. Me and my dad were more, our father-son thing was scary movies and Star Trek and those things. But football was my dad's alone. Even when we went to a family outing on Sunday, rarely, he didn't like to go because he wanted to watch his football. He'd end up watching football at the relative's house. And, we'd have our big dinner and then he'd go in there and watch football. He rarely missed his football. Big Dallas Cowboys fan, my dad was. He did like the St. Louis Cardinals as well when they had a team in St. Louis and they were the Cardinals. He didn't root for the Rams as much. I don't recall. I don't think he did, but he did love the Dallas Cowboys. That was his favorite team. Anyway, I'm going to take a breather here and I'll be right back with more of my dad. And, I'm Leonard Riggs. This is my podcast From My Head to Your Ears. I'm Leonard Riggs, and this is my podcast From My Head to Your Ears, and I'm talking about Leonard Riggs Sr., my father. He died on May 7th, 2016. We're coming up on 9 years of him being gone, and I miss that man every day of my life. I have dreams about him, and they say when you have dreams about your relative, they're visiting you. I always feel like he's trying to tell me something, but I never have quite figured it out. My mom's always in my dreams too, but she's not there. She's suggested, or either my dad has said she's over there, wherever there is, or it is just a feeling I have that she's there too, but she's not. I don't see her in my dreams. My mom, especially in his later years, when Mom would go see my sister in Missouri or whatever, I always stayed home to stay with my dad. He was just I was just his right hand, or he was my right hand. When my dad was in his later years, everything I did was for Dad. The movies I'd pick out, was to watch with Dad, or stuff like that. Or when we went shopping, we bought food that he would like, because my dad was very definite as to what he liked, especially in his later years. He got to where he would only eat hamburger, and my mom couldn't get him to eat fried chicken or fish or anything, which he did love that later or earlier in his life. But if he did eat fried chicken, he would eat chicken legs. But when we'd go out to eat, he was just like, I just want beef. So we did Arby's a lot, or McDonald's, because he liked a good hamburger, which I'm just like him on that too. I went to Mexico and had a cheeseburger because I love cheeseburgers. That is very much a Leonard Riggs Sr. thing that I inherited. But my favorite story about my dad, we took him to a doctor's appointment in Carbondale, Illinois, and we ended up going to Long John Silver's to eat lunch. And my dad was kind of like, he wasn't really looking forward to that. He did. He used to love Long John Silver's. But in his later years, like I said, he got to where he didn't want nothing to do with fish or anything. And we get up there, and there's this little elderly lady working. And my sister and I order our stuff. My mom was going to order for my dad. And my dad says, I want beef. Now, this is a long time after Clara Peller and the Wendy's Where's the Beef commercials. This is, probably the early 2010s, probably a couple years before he passed away, but he's screaming, "I want beef. Where's the beef? I want beef." And my sister and I are over getting our sodas and we're dying. And we look over and that little lady clerk is just bewildered. Like, I don't, sir, we don't have beef here. I think my mom ended up getting him chicken planks and hush puppies and French fries. The man loved fried potatoes. My dad was a fried potato freak. And as a matter of fact, every Sunday, my mom would go to church, and after she went to church, he'd cut up a potato, and fry it up. He usually cut it in the circles and fry it up, and he'd share it with me, which, oh God, that was so good. My dad, I don't know why, I'll fry potatoes and it doesn't taste like my dad's potatoes for some reason, but I try to have French fries on Sundays as a tribute to my dad, which is funny. Recently, recently a friend of mine gave me a Frankenstein, it's not a doll, it's a detailed recreation of Frankenstein's monster starring Boris Karloff from NECA, N-E-C-A. And I want to start, I thought what I want to do is do a shadow box or something of these figures, and do a tribute to my dad. I have another Frankenstein, another friend got me, my friend Joni got me as well. But I go to Christmas time. I still see things I'd buy for my dad. Because my dad would have loved that. He would have put it on a shelf. He would have loved that. But his favorite movie of all time was Frankenstein with Boris Karloff. He'd always tell the story about how he saved up 5 cents to go to the Globe Theater here in Christopher, Illinois, and he walked up by himself and he saw the movie and it scared him so bad he ran all the way home. And I think he said then he went to see it again. My dad he loved scary movies, and my love of scary movies came from him, and he passed that on to my sister Kim and me, and my sister Kim was a big influence in monster movies for me and my nephew John, who also loves monster movies, and her sons. But he loved the Universal monsters the most, with, like I said, Frankenstein was his favorite, but he liked Dracula and the Wolfman and all those things too, and he introduced those to me. When we got cable in 1976, they would show these movies on a regular basis, plus Irv Kopey's late night, Friday night horror movie show, and he'd show those, but my dad would always stay up and watch those. Loved monster movies. And my mom would want to go to bed because this was often on a Friday night or a Saturday night. She had church the next day, so she would go to bed. And then, of course, I would watch the monster movies and fall asleep and wake up scared to death. And in my room, my dad would put me, in my bed, I guess. And I'd scream for my dad, and he'd have to sleep with me because I was scared of the monsters. But then I like him and the little kid that went to see the movie and run all the way home scared. I was the same way. I would want to watch the monster movie again. I get that from my dad. My dad was such an athlete when he was younger. He was a World War II veteran. And after World War II, he came back, and with a group of friends, they formed these softball leagues in my town. And I feel like I've said this all before, and if I have, forgive me. But they formed softball leagues in town, and They were sponsored by the Griesdick brothers. My dad was a star athlete, and he was the best pitcher on the team. And a lot of the older guys, when I started working at my job, and the older guys in town, my dad was friends with everybody. A lot of the older guys in town would tell me what a great athlete my dad was and what a good ball pitcher he was. And they played softball, not baseball, but they played softball. And he was just an amazing star pitcher. And my nephews inherited his athletic ability. I did not. I wasn't interested in sports. And I said that in the earlier segment. And my dad and I had our father-son things with Star Trek and horror films, as I said in the last segment. But my uncles used to kind of jump him about that. But my dad tried to show me ball, and I didn't catch on, and I wasn't interested. And he'd kind of make fun of me the way I pitched, and it'd get me aggravated. So he just gave up on it. I just was not an athlete, and nor was I interested in sports. But my dad didn't watch anything but football. Like I said, he didn't watch baseball. He would watch it, but he wasn't thrilled with it. And he didn't like college football for some reason, but NFL only for him. I should have brought that up in the last segment, but that's true. Dad didn't talk about the war too much, for some reason. And I talked to my cousin Scott, and he said the same thing, that he didn't talk about, my Uncle Dude didn't talk about the service either. And there's another thing, when my uncles would come visit my dad's brothers, and they bring over my Aunt Tootsie, all my family had nicknames. And I laugh because when I talk about my Aunt Tootsie and my Uncle Duty and my Uncle Pinhead, everybody kind of looks at me like, what? But yeah, my dad's brother, whose name was Clyde, actually, Clyde Riggs, for some reason was called Duty, and I never knew why he was called Duty, D-U-D-Y. And my Aunt Tootsie was Helen. My Uncle Irvin was Pinhead. And we never knew why, unless his kids do. And if you're listening out there, I know my cousin Scott listens to my podcast. I'd like to know how Uncle Dude got his name Duty. Because I know how my dad was Mighty. Everybody still talks about my dad being Mighty Riggs. And that was to do with his athletic ability, because my dad was a well-known athlete. He has records in track at the grade school that are set to this day. One of my classmates, Phil Steinmetz, broke my dad's track record back in 1981. And that was a big deal, because my dad was in Christopher Grade School in the early 1940s and late 30s. So we were talking 40 years later. And you know what blows my mind? Just on a side note here, the fact that 1981 is 40-some years ago now. So as old as that record was, Phil's record is as old as my dad's record was back then. That's kind of crazy. Anyway, that's a kind of an off-ramp thought there, as I'm apt to do. But, yeah, he held records that are still standing at Christopher Grade School. My dad didn't go to high school because he joined World War II. He joined the service early on. He lied about his age, because back then they didn't have records of age, and my grandma consented to him going. So he lied about his age and got in the service, and actually was maybe 16, 17 when he went in. But he did not like the service. He was stationed in Burma, India, where he regularly got dysentery, and all he talked about, and if anybody from India is listening to my podcast, I'm sorry. This is my dad's. We're talking about 1940, whatever, early 1940s. And wherever he was stationed was dirty and not modern. it was pretty wild. I wouldn't think that anybody in that area, I don't know what it's like now, but he actually contracted malaria, which was when he passed, the jaundice from malaria came back on him. True story. And it actually is listed on his death certificate as the malaria was a part of, was considered a condition of his death. All those years later, it's kind of strange. But like I said, whenever he was under the influence of drugs, when he broke his hip, whatever they gave him, and he wasn't feeling a thing, he went back to World War II. So that was a big, World War II was very important to him, but he didn't really talk about it. Not to me, but now say, if a friend of mine would talk about it, he would tell him. But to me, he wouldn't talk about it. And my cousin Scott said his dad's the same way. So it's kind of strange. But I would have loved to know more about his service experience, but it's too late for that. It's kind of sad. Oftentimes I think of stuff I wish I could ask my dad and my mom, and they're not here, and my sister Lori, and it's a strange thing, but that's true. My dad had his little way of calling things by my dad used to yell at me when I had my stereo too loud, and he'd say, turn that Victrola down. Victrola. Yeah, I wound that record player up, with the little crank, right? Or he called the couch a Devament, which I don't know where he got that. I don't think that's, I looked that up, and I've never seen anybody called a Devament before. And he'd call a car a rumble seat. So a lot of the old-fashioned names. Of course, I grew up calling the refrigerator an ice box. Myself, I didn't know any better. I don't know, just some of these things that I didn't think was off when I was a kid because I heard it all the time. But now that I'm older, I just kind of laugh about it. A Devament for a couch. I'm not sure about that. Oh gosh. I feel like I've said all this before, and I apologize if I have, but I think it's stories worth retelling because I love my dad so much. And like I said, he's been on my mind so strongly here lately. And, I do know why, because I love the man with all my heart, but I don't know why, particularly now, I'm feeling this way. And oftentimes I'm at a loss for what I want to talk about in a podcast. And I was telling someone one of these stories, and I thought, I want a podcast about my dad. I've done one before, but I was more sad and grief stricken at that point. But today I'm not sad. I'm just lovingly remembering my dad. My dad was all about, I was talking about the movies he loved. My dad loved, besides football and monster movies, my dad loved Westerns. John Wayne was his absolute favorite movie star. Loved John Wayne movies, Western movies. He loved war movies. Well, oddly enough, even though he wouldn't talk about his service, he did love to watch war movies, and particularly with John Wayne. I didn't share his love of those two genres. I do like a good Western every now and then, but I don't like war movies that much. Oftentimes he'd watch that by himself or with mom because they grew up in that era where those were popular. TV, he loved, the A-Team was his favorite with Mr. T and George Peppard. Magnum P.I. We watched detective shows together a lot. We watched Barnaby Jones with Buddy Ebsen and Mannix. What else? Gosh. Oh, shoot. Baa Black Sheep with Robert Conrad was one of his favorites, which is also about World War II and the Black Sheep Squadron. Buck Rogers, because my dad also liked science fiction, Star Trek, but his all-time favorite was Flash Gordon with Buster Crabbe. And when they started doing Buck Rogers, they did Buck Rogers with Gil Gerard in the 1970s, early 80s. And my dad was a big fan of that. Buster Crabbe actually guest starred in that as an older guy. Obviously, Buster Crabbe was up there in the years when he did it. But, he loved the Tarzan movies with Johnny Weissmuller. And so do I, actually. I could still watch those to this day. I was trying to think. Bing Crosby movies. Bing Crosby was my dad's all-time favorite singer. Nobody could sing like Bing Crosby. Bingermeister was his favorite. White Christmas was his favorite Christmas movie. Favorite Christmas song. White Christmas. My dad absolutely loved Bing Crosby, and he also liked Dean Martin. Of course, Dean Martin starred in the Matt Helm movies, which I love, from the 1960s. And those are really cool, by the way. Movies, if you've never heard of them, Mike Myers' Austin Powers movies, kind of, the Matt Helm movies were a big influence, as was the James Bond movies. But Matt Helm was a spy, played by Dean Martin. And of course, he would sing in the movies. Those movies are a great deal of fun. The late Sharon Tate's actually in one of those movies, before she got killed by Charles Manson. But, yeah, my dad was just, I think in the years I grew up, my dad kind of was a couch potato. He didn't do the sports anymore. He'd watch sports. But before I was born, he played in the softball leagues and all that stuff. And he ended up getting a job. He had an office job as a mechanical draftsman, had a job in a plant where he worked hard and sweated and got dirty there in the years that when I was growing up, and would do drafting on the side. But when he was off work, he was tired, so he liked to watch a lot of TV. And my dad, my house that I'm living in right now, this was my dad's castle. He bought it as a shack. He worked 3 jobs, and he worked so hard getting this house livable for my mom and my sister Lori, and my sister Connie would visit here. She lived with her mom, but she would come here. And my mom was pregnant with my sister Kim. He worked real hard in between 3 jobs, getting this house up to par and getting it to be where it ended up being when I grew up. And my dad did such a good job on things that they lasted for years and years and years. Seems like when I inherited this house, everything started falling apart, and I am not handy like my dad was. But my dad was a good carpenter, and he put windows in that he kept everything ship shape. I mean, we had a carpeting from 1978 that he would vacuum every day. It looked brand new clear up until I took over, and I have cats and everything. They were in the carpeting. That was after Dad passed. We weren't allowed to have animals in the house, and I have my cats. And although he would have loved my cats, especially probably Sonny and Livy, I feel like guilty saying that about my cats. But he would have loved my bub, my Sonny, because he's so cuddly. I could see my dad holding Sonny. And my Liv. She's all cuddled with me right now. But we weren't allowed to have animals in the house. My dad got us a duck back in the early 70s called Chi-Chi. And we kept him in the house when he was a duckling. And then when he got older, we put him outside. And, but that was my dad, always kind of quirky. My dad loved birds. My dad did love birds. And I called him the bird whisperer. I'd get a bird in the house, which freaks me out, and he'd come over and he would talk the bird out. Actually, my dad loved animals. Even though he wouldn't let them in the house, he was a big animal lover. He was a gentle soul. He didn't like to go hunting or anything. But I still remember him feeding a bird that just came up to him one time. And it ate out of his hand and got on his shoulder. And this was later in his life. And he just, I guess my dad had such a gentle soul that animals detected that. Matter of fact, when I dog sat for my buddy Brandon, his dogs, we'd have them in the house, and his dog Jackie would go run and get in bed with my dad. It was just like some natural attraction to my dad. And that's the way it was. Well, I'm going to take a break and maybe tell you a couple more stories about my dad before I wrap things up. I'm Leonard Riggs. This is my podcast from my head to your ears. I'm Leonard Riggs. This is my podcast from my head to your ears. And I said, I'm very much Leonard Riggs Jr., and I'm talking about Leonard Riggs Sr. today. I'm a lot like my dad in so many ways, but not a lot like him in other ways. My dad was such a character. My dad was a good-looking guy, too. He had coal black hair that he put Vaseline hair tonic in, always combed his hair, always tried to look nice, had a shit-eating grin. He was kind of a flirt, which used to make my mom mad. He would flirt with like little girl cashiers and stuff. And he always had that little charm about him. One of my co-workers would tell me, all the girls were after my dad when he got home. My dad had green eyes and like I said, coal black hair, and was an athlete. And just when my mom started dating him, they both had previous marriages that didn't go so well. And he met my mom at a skating rink. And they started dating and hit it off immediately. My mom wasn't sure at first because my dad was a drinker and he smoked a big cigar, but was he a sharp dresser. I mean, my dad dressed, when he was dating my mom, he dressed khaki pants and, fancy socks and nice polo shirts and that coal black hair, whatever. And, my mom was a stunner too. She was so pretty. She was built like Marilyn Monroe. And my dad, not only did he love my mom, he was really attracted to my mom, and vice versa. They were very much in love with each other and attracted to each other. Obviously, they had 3 kids together. But my dad loved my mom so much, and my mom loved my dad. That's something they fought like cats and dogs. They clashed on a lot of things. My mom was family orientated and loved company and would love to go out to eat. And my dad was a homebody and didn't like company. And, they clashed on holidays every year. We would get into the fight about the holidays. I kind of sided up with my mom because that's where I'm like my mom. I love my family and I love family get-togethers and that kind of thing. My dad didn't like it. Never did. And they clashed and clashed and clashed over that sort of thing. But say my mom would go visit my sister Lori or go to my Aunt Faye's and spend a night away from my dad. He would go to bed, but he wouldn't undo the bed. He would lay on top of the sheets, and he pouted, and he'd pout till she got home. My mom got to go to the East Coast with my sister. They went to New York, and they were gone quite a long time, and my dad pouted the whole time, and he was just lost. And he just loved my mom that much. And when he died, he worried about her till the day he was dying. And that's, I took care of my mom as my dad would want me to. So when my mom passed, the thought of so many thoughts went through my head, and I'm going to kind of get sad here a little bit. So many thoughts went through my head, and I remember sitting in the chair by her bed, and they took her away. And there was such a sense of peace, an air of peace. I can't describe it. It was like after an electrical storm, and I think I've said this before, but it was. And I thought, what a great reunion right now. My dad and my mom together again. That's all I could think of. And I started crying, but not sadly. I was happy that, I'm sure he was so glad to see her. And I'm not going to get into, I think I did get into in the Halloween episode about my dad. I think my dad watched over my mom. She often would reach the ceiling, and I felt his presence quite strongly here. I don't feel their presence, either one, here anymore in this house. I often wondered what it would be like when, a big worry of mine when my mom passed. My dad didn't die here at home. He died at the nursing home where he was in rehab. He wanted to come home so bad. That was another story. But my mom died here in my living room. And I wondered how I would feel with her passing here, but it doesn't bother me. I like I said, I felt that she was done here, and she went to heaven, and she's with my dad, and I'm glad. I feel like she's together with my dad. So that's a good feeling. But he loved her so much, and like I said, they fought like cats and dogs, but at the end they would make up. My dad had PTSD, which was never diagnosed, but he would have night terrors, and oftentimes he'd hit my mom in his sleep, and it used to make, especially when her mind was going bad there at the end, I would have to referee them because she would, I would hear I was trying to sleep, and I'd have to get up and referee them because they would fight. She'd have to be in here with a look of disgust, and he would be, begging her for forgiveness. And I'm like, what's going on? He hit me. And he's like, Anime. He called my mom Anime. I didn't mean to. I promise you, I would never hurt you. You know what I mean? Like, but my mom didn't understand that he had PTSD and was having night terrors, because they really didn't diagnose that stuff for World War II veterans. At least they didn't for him. Yeah, he would get kind of violent in his sleep. And, that's kind of sad, really. But, they always made up. One of my fondest memories is when I'd find them a movie together. I had to work midnights for many years. So before I went to work, I'd always get them a movie. I have a huge movie collection, and I'd put it on for them because they really didn't know how to work the DVD player or the VHS thing. So I'd get it all set up for them, and they'd pop popcorn, and I'd go get ready for work. I'd come in here. They'd be cuddled up together, watching the movie, eating their popcorn like a young couple. And it would just make me feel good. And that's a good memory I have of my mom and dad together. Like I said, I think they're together. I hope they're watching movies up in the sky. And I hope if they have DVD players in heaven, I hope they figured it out, because I'm not up there to help them. I remember my mom and dad would start to talk about movies. They couldn't remember a movie star name, so they would call me at work, and I would get this description. Oh, Leonard, you know that guy in that movie? They were in that movie, and they were together, and, they were like, and I'll be like, oh, you mean Doris Day and Rock Hudson and Pillow Talk? Yeah, that's it. I'm not joking. I knew my mom and dad so well. I knew what they were talking about, even though they had a vague description. Not just my mom and dad, really anybody in my family. I was really good about deciphering what they were talking about. Just, I guess, a natural connection to them. Oh, gosh, I miss that. Do you know who that guy is in that movie? That guy and that girl? Yeah, sure, Doris Day and Rock Hudson. I don't know. But anyway, I could talk about my dad all day, and that man, I tell you, if I could only be half the man he was, I used to say, this was a funny thing too, he would say, I would see a new gadget, like say a VCR, even a VCR. My dad said, I could build that for you. You're going to build me a VCR? Yeah, I could do that. You know what? I bet he could if he had the proper, and go to Radio Shack and buy all the parts. I bet my dad could have, because he was a very smart guy. But that was my dad. Oh gosh, I remember him building me an impromptu clubhouse outside with scrap wood, and I played in that thing for a long time. He never finished it though. He made it in a triangle. He made the very simple structure, but oftentimes I'd cover it with something. It was like a big tent, or one time they had a robot on the back of a comic book, and I fell for those. If you're my age and you remember this, I'm in my late 50s. They used to have the ads on back of comic books, and you could buy the glow-in-the-dark life-size Frankenstein with glow-in-the-dark eyes, I should say. And when you ordered it, it would come in and be this little plastic poster with two stick-on stickers to put on his eyes. Just a big hoax. But there was one that had a robot, and my dad said, I can build your robot. Well, he went and tried to do it. He built the frame of the robot, and I don't know what he was going to do with it, but he never finished. He never finished it. He made a frame and put cardboard around it. I guess he was going to paint it silver. I don't know what he was going to do. I never quite figured that out, but I think I lost interest in it, and he did too, so we didn't ever finish that. My dad did teach me how to do stop motion animation with the camera, and I used to do that. They bought me a Super 8 camera and a projector when I was older, and my dad taught me what you do is you like I use my Mego action figures, my Star Trek, and I'd move it a little, take a little bit of film, and that would make it move. My friend Craig actually got into that and took classes for that at SIU, and his were really good, and mine were kind of cheesy. I haven't seen those in so many years. I recently bought an apparatus where I can transfer our old home movies to digital files. I'm going to let my nephew do that. He doesn't know that yet. So Daniel, that's going to be your job if you're listening. I was always ashamed to show my friend Craig those movies because I just, his were so much better that he didn't even know I did those. I told him later in life. But my dad, there's another thing. I guess my dad loved gadgets. I mean, he would love he bought me like remote control, and I use me in quotes. He bought me remote control cop cars and a train set when I was too young to have them, so they really were his, and so on and so forth. He got to relive his childhood by having a son. He would often buy me toys that he wanted or he thought were interesting, and of course I would love them. And that's how I got into Star Trek, actually, because my dad loved Star Trek. And he got me into Star Trek, and we'd always go see the Star Trek movies together. Like I said, I shared a rich history with my dad and father-son things. He would take all of us kids out to Andy's Creek, which was this little creek in kind of outside of town and where he grew up and played. That was kind of his favorite place to go, and his favorite place to go when he was older. And I think I mentioned when I want to be close to my dad, I used to go walking. I would walk out there and have a good cry because I felt my dad's spirit out there at Andes Creek, more so than at the cemetery, where I don't feel like my parents are at the cemetery. I feel like they're in heaven. So I don't know. But anyway, I think I'm going to take a break and wrap this up because I am getting hoarse. I am Leonard Riggs. This is my podcast From My Head to Your Ears, talking about my dad, Leonard Riggs Sr. I'll be right back. I'm Leonard Riggs, and this is my podcast From My Head to Your Ears. I'm talking about my dad, Leonard Riggs Sr. Thank you for coming along on this little walk down memory lane. And I'm glad I'm at a point in my life where I can remember the good things about my dad and laugh a lot till I cry. I miss that man so much. I miss my mom. I miss my family. I miss the way things were. But my goal is to get to a point where I am, not that I don't appreciate the now, but I just feel like something's missing right now, and that's my family, I guess. But I love my cats, so I can't ever imagine myself thinking as of what my life is now as being the good old days like I do those times. And I am so lucky to have had good parents, and my dad and my uncles and my aunts and everybody, cousins. And I'm very lucky to have the family I've had and the friends I've had. And I've been very fortunate. I've not had a bad life at all. And I realize that a lot, and I'm very thankful to God. We have our ups and downs and bad moments and good moments. It's just life. And you just get a short time on this earth, and I'm so glad I got to share a good deal of my life with my parents. So anyway, thank you for listening. I love doing my podcast. I say it every week. I'm thankful that I get to do them. I'm thankful when you listen. And I do watch to see how many listeners I have. And I'm not doing too bad, and I appreciate that. Thank you to everybody that comments, and thank you for all the comments I hear. I love that. That's why I'm doing this. I love that I can do tributes to my dad and let the world know what a great man he was and how funny he was. But anyway, I'm losing my voice, so I'm going to stop before I start choking. Until next time, I'm Leonard Riggs. This is my podcast From My Head to Your Ears. I love you. Mwah, 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 mwah.